Well, good day, scholars. This is Dr. Franklin, and this is a mini lecture dealing with digital and extended selves in cyberspace. In this particular presentation, I'll discuss four factors that are linked to things becoming technologies of the extended mind. Following this conversation, we will discourse briefly about the difference between the brain and the mind. And then finally, toward the tail end of this presentation, I'll talk about the difference between automatic and controlled processes and Daniel Dennett's perspective on how and why individuals perceive themselves as being superior to other creatures. Social media technologies and technology in general has the potential to extend our cognitive processes beyond the wetware of our brain to software and hardware used by the brain. This extended mind theory basically highlights how our thinking consists of complex feedback and feed forward loops around our brain, bodies, and the outside world. Andy Clark and David Chalmers were the catalysts for this extended minds theory in a collaborative paper they created. Just as an example of this, if you use a smartphone to compare and contrast information, you are using technology to assist, aid, and extend your mental processes. This present situation causes many questions to arise in regard to technology if the technology is doing the thinking or if it is the person, for instance. Additionally, other questions may deal with whether or not it is necessary to apply offline ethics used in everyday life to anything that results in the extended mind loop. Clark and Chalmers go on to state that via the parity principle, if an entity or process outside of the mind can go into it and serve as an aspect of the mind, then it stands to reason that the entity itself can stand as a part of our extended mind. There are four factors that need to be present in order for things to extend our mental processes. One is constancy. In other words, the technology needs to be readily available. Number two is facility. In other words, effort to retrieve it is relatively negligible. Number three, trust needs to be in place. Individuals need to be able to trust the technology they are utilizing. And then finally, four is prior endorsement. In other words, what have others' experience been like with that technology, or perhaps historically, what has your experience been like with the technology? All of these do not necessarily have to be unconditionally met. Chalmers and Clark have went as far as to identify technologies like the smartphone, the web, and mobile-based internet technologies as legitimate devices that extend our cognitive processes by helping us debate, remember our food preferences, and even plan for the future. There is a distinction between the brain and mind as elucidated by neurological research that highlights how certain brain circuitry are tied to mental processes. Many researchers dispute the idea that the mind is a thinking thing, but rather, when we think, they believe we simply use resources such as our hand, our larynx, and imagination to think with. This is very nuanced, but the gist of this is that many don't see the need to separate the mind and the brain as Descartes would, and many do not say the mind is a substance that thinks of its own accord. Rather, as we are conscious and reflect on ourselves and the world, we accrue an assemblage of ideas that can be communicated in a variety of ways. In some, the brain is a thing and the mind is a concept. Successful interaction with the external environment is contingent on the brain's sensory processing, and it can be interrupted by damage to sensory cortices or other brain regions. Thomas Metzinger's brains in a vat thought experiment emphasize how mental processes, for example, consciousness and cognition, are contingent on the wetware of our brains. Metzinger thought experiment also highlights how when portions of the environment come to be properly coupled with an agent's brain, they can be deemed constitutive parts of the whole cognitive mechanism. Many researchers proffer that the extended mind performs cognitive operations via external technologies using automatic and controlled processes. Controlled processes represent cognitions that are slow, deliberate, intentional, and controlled, while automatic processes are not in conscious awareness and may occur spontaneously. An example of the usage of automatic and controlled processing is one's reading development over time. When one is first learning to read, their processes may be very controlled and deliberate as one sounds out words using phonics and as one uses schemata from previous experiences to figure out how to pronounce words. Over time, reading becomes more spontaneous and deliberate. Controlled effort begins to go away. And in other words, controlled effort may only occur when faced with extreme or challenging words. Specific neural correlates have been identified for controlled and automatic processes. Matthew Lieberman, a researcher at UCLA, has actually identified brain regions for automatic processing as the X system, whereas brain regions dealing with controlled thinking is connected with the C system. So, when individuals are vacillating between controlled and automatic processes, it is more likely the case that their cortex is involved as it pertains to controlled cognitive processes, but the amygdala and the basal ganglia will likely become more active if surprises or unexpected circumstances occur. For cyberpsychologists, automatic thought processes can be thought to be included in embodied and extended processes. Smartphones can enhance our ability to problem solve, giving the stimulation and content that can be generated. And given that it can be represented in the mind, for many, it stands to reason it should be considered as an aspect of the mind. Daniel Dennett believes that one of the reasons why human beings are superior to other creatures is because we are able to offload information into our environment in a way that allows us to streamline, enhance, and re represent our meanings beyond limitations. Research highlights how subcortical brain structures, or brain regions below the cortex, play a seminal role in controlled and automatic processes through indirect and direct pathways that ultimately affect our thinking and behavior. In lectures to come, we'll talk about the role of automatic thought processes and controlled thought processes in ethical decision making.